Romans, it reminds us that there is a need in the world. How are they to call on the one in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim, to tell him? And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. Lest we forget, we are the church, not the building. You and I. And we go to the church building, we go to worship, but when we leave this place, we are the church. We are the church while we're here. And it's hard to know sometimes how to complete our mission. What I call it today, is getting from A to Z. How do we get from where we are today to where God wants us to be? Because God wants us to continue to grow and to move forward. What's the key to unlocking the continent of Africa there? But what's the key to unlocking Christ's love in people's hearts wherever we can? That's what we want to talk about this month. And I want to start out by saying that really the start of it is get to know people. Get their names. I've got another book that the title of it is just walk across the street. Just do something simple. Get to know somebody. Get to know your neighbors. We were talking last night, and I tell you, because of our dog, that crazy dog Roger that's 19 years old, I have gotten to know more neighbors in this neighborhood than I ever would have otherwise. Simple little icebreaker, It works. Find a way to get somebody's name. Find out what you have in common with the people around you. That's the first step always in sharing our faith. And yet, okay, here we go. Here's a test. How many of you would call yourself an introvert? Okay. I think most United Methodists are introverts. I really do. It's hard for us. It's hard to say, hi, my name's Paul. What's your name? Well, it's easy for me to say my name's Paul, but it's hard for me to say, what's your name? Isn't that something? Oh, it is. Well, I like to sometimes start with a little bit of humor and with people, and I like to tell puns, so here we go. I've got 3 puns for you today before we get into the meat of the message. There was a kid that was telling about a class field trip. He said, hey, our class field trip's going to the Coca-Cola factory. Another kid says, I hope there's not a pop quiz. Okay. How does Moses make his tea? He brews it. And here, I saved the best for last. I hope it's the best because I think it is. Why do milking stools have only 3 legs? Because the cow has the udder. Okay. Okay. You're very generous. And you know what? That's what I want to talk about, because God is generous with the love. It goes everywhere. And so I want to use these three letters, give, to talk about this today. The first one, of course, is generosity. And when we think about God's generosity, there's so many scriptures. The Apostle Paul, who wrote half of the New Testament, believed that God is a generous God. God never stops giving the second chances, third chances, and so forth, on and on and on. And he said, God is a God who saves everyone who calls on the name of the Lord. There's the name again. Get their names. Even a sinner like Paul. And that is good news. That is great news. He wrote, there's no longer Jew or Greek. There's no longer slave or free, no longer male or female. All of you are one in Christ Jesus. We're all in the same boat, and it's a great boat to be in. Jesus said that the harvest is bigger than you can imagine. But the problem is there are few workers, and that is a problem. That is a problem. The problem that we as United Methodists and other churches that have been around for a long time have is that, in the world today, it's a different world, and we've never had to do it this way before. We've just kind of coasted, and people came to us. But here's some statistics for you. If you're 80 years old, around that age, in your generation, 65% of people are still connected to the church. If you're in your 60s, fewer than 35% are connected with the church. And I'll skip some years, but down to the Gen X's, the 30 to 40 years olds, they're 20%. 20%. The number of people connecting to God through the church is dropping dramatically with each generation. So that's just to get your attention. That's why this is a serious thing that we need to talk about. This study that we're going through this month, actually Kane Wieselman, our delegate to annual conference, saw this sitting on the book table there and said, I think we should do that one. I said, yeah, I've had that book for a couple of years and I haven't really done anything with it. So this comes from, and I'm going to put him on the spot. There he is. He's up there. Yeah. This was Cain's thought, that we need to learn how to get somebody's name and then take the next step and the next step and the next step. Build the relationship. Okay. As I said, connecting to God through the church. There's a lot of people that are able to connect to God without the church, but I think they're missing out, and I know you think so too. There's a story, Philip Yancey is one of my favorite authors. I had a chance to see him in Denver a few years ago. He lives out there now, and he tells a story just the other day, came across on Facebook. He was driving into Denver. He lives about an hour away, and he gets to the city to do some chores and get some stuff. I forgot my wallet. I'm an hour away from home. I could go back and wasted 2 hours. He says, or I could come up with a plan B. And he says, plan B's got to be better than driving 2 hours, So he goes to the stores and he found 2 clerks, he says, that were willing to manually enter his credit card number. Because he had it memorized. The way the world is now today. You're always giving that stuff out if you're buying stuff online. And so he knew his credit card number, he knew his expiration date, and he knew the funny little code on the back. He had it memorized. And he found 2 people that were willing to do that. And he's feeling pretty good about himself. Hey, this is going to work. Plan B is going to work out. And then oh my goodness, I'm out of gas. I'm out of gas. What am I going to do? And so he starts hunting through the car in his pockets. He comes up with $4.35. goes into the gas station. It's one of those prepay gas stations, and there's this gal in front of him in line, and she's buying 3 packs of cigarettes, and he's kind of looking at her, and she's got blue streaks there and purple over here, and got a sleeve tattoo, and the instant she gets her 3 packs of cigarettes, she starts opening them because she's got to have one, and she's walking away, and he's saying, I left my wallet at home, I've got this change. He stacks up his quarters and dimes and nickel, and $4.35 worth of gas. That should get me home, he says. So he goes out and he's pumping the gas, and this gal walks up behind him. This gal with the blue and purple streaks and the sleeve tattoo and chain smoking, and she says, "Hey, I've been going through some rough times. I could use some good karma," she says. I gave the guy $5 for your gas. Something small. $5 worth of gas. You know what Philip said? He said, "You just made my day." It's amazing, isn't it? What a great way to get to know somebody. People are still connecting with God. I believe it. Outside the church. But they need some support. And that's what we can give them. We can share our stories with them. We can tell people that it does make a difference, that God is generous. And that's what we can tell them, is that I have felt God's presence. This weekend, it was just kind of amazing. We happened to find a coffee table and end tables that were for sale, and we picked them up. We were to take them out to the lake. So I take them out to the lake, and I replace the old ones that have been there since before we bought the place, and bring them back into town. And for those of you visiting, what we do here is if you don't want something, you set it out on the curb, and it's gone by the next day, And so I text Debbie and say, "Hey, I'm back home. I'm gonna kind of watch and see how long they last, because we're in an area that's, some people can't even find our church, You know that. It's like we're out in the middle of this residential neighborhood. Hardly anybody drives by just to drive by. So I look out, and after about 10 minutes, they're still there. And then I start doing some other things, and I'm not thinking about it. And the doorbell rings. Oh, okay, well, I'm glad I'm dressed. Okay, yeah, so, okay, and I go answer the door, and this gal is there, and she says, "Is that stuff for free? I mean, we didn't want to just take it. We just moved to town. We just moved into Glencoe, and we're from out of state, and we don't really have anything." And so, I helped them load it up. I tied the coffee table to the top of the rack that they had on the car, and they drove away. And then I looked at my watch and I go, 20 minutes. Wow. 20 minutes, and it was gone. Folks, God works in amazing ways. Because when I put something out on the curb, I always kind of say a little prayer. I hope somebody that needs this comes by before somebody comes by that doesn't really need it, These folks really needed a little hand. And in fact, if anybody has a bed they don't need, I know a good place to put it. I've got their phone number, so let me know afterwards. God works in our lives, and sometimes we don't even recognize it. That's part of the problem. We don't think about how God's working in our lives. But we need to recognize the victories when they come. And one of the things that this author suggests in the book is that we get back to giving testimonies in church. To just, if you've got a good story, let me know beforehand. And I'll see what Sunday it's going to fit in the best, And we'll share a little story. We do that a little bit during our prayer times, but we should do it more often. Because you don't always want to hear me, You've got something to say too. The thing about it is, I found a good example. One of the pastors down at Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City, we were down there last last Sunday and went, and he told a story about something that happened in his life, and this one was quite a while ago. He talked about how he believed that when he first got into the ministry, he said, this is my theology. I believe that if I pick up a hitchhiker, that means that God wants me to share my faith with them. And back then he picked up hitchhikers all the time. Well, he talked about how he was studying, had a class on the book of Moses' life. And so he was taking the class in seminary at the Bible school. I guess it was a Bible college. But he was taking the class on a Tuesday night, and in his church, he was teaching the same thing on Thursday night. That's how it works sometimes. You learn and you teach. And then the Tuesday night, the teacher pulled out a model of the tabernacle, the tent that traveled with them all through the desert and led up to the building of the temple. But it's this little model of what the tabernacle looked like. And it was kind of neat at Church of the Resurrection because they had one, life-size, set up. It was so cool. But back to the story. He says, he asked the teacher if he could take it and he could use it for his class. And of course the teacher said, yeah. So he throws it in the back seat of the car, and he, sure enough, he's driving along, sees a hitchhiker, pick him up, climb in. This young man got in, he looks, glances over in the back seat, he says, is that the tent that God lived in for a while? I picked up a Bible last night for the first time, and I opened it to that story. Isn't it something? Oh, what a great story. We were in tears, He said that out of that conversation, that young man went on to join the church and become part of the community, and he's now a pastor, pastoring outside Kansas City. We never know how our lives are going to touch somebody else. And how God is using our lives, even when we don't know it. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it happens everywhere and all the time. And that's what I want to kind of say today. I talked about how it's good to share our own story, and I shared the story of the coffee table with you. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to share your story with somebody beside you. And I know it's uncomfortable. Have you seen God at work in your life lately? Or when? At our council meetings, I start out by saying, okay, well, let's have some celebrations. What do we celebrate about the church? How has the church made a difference in your life lately? And those of you that go to the council meetings, sometimes it's deadly silent. Kind of frightening for me to not hear anything about how the church makes a difference. Maybe I should start asking, where have you seen God? Because God is bigger than these four walls. And God works beyond the church. And sometimes when we say the church, we think of the building. How has God been working in your life lately? The thing that I want to show you here, everywhere and every way, here are some ways where we can share. We share through service, but one thing we don't do a very good job of is communicating why we give of ourselves. I remember when I first got into ministry, my mom, when I went home to visit from seminary, she says, I volunteer everywhere. I do all kinds of stuff through the church and stuff. Do I have to tell people why I'm doing it? And, I was younger then. I didn't know how to answer. And I said, well, yeah, it's good, but though maybe if you're not connected with the church, maybe you should tell. My mom's more of an introvert than I am. But we need to communicate. So this is what I came up with, and I had this running, and I have it displayed downstairs during the Food for Kids. I think this is important to tell people. Packing these meals is a free gift from your friends at Bethlehem United Methodist Church, because we had a lot of people come in and helped out that weren't connected with the church. We give freely because God's love is always free and is available all the time to everyone, including you. We don't want any of God's children to go hungry. May your souls be filled as well as we give this gift together. This is our way of sharing God's love with you and showing others God's love through our actions. It's important to let people know why we are giving of ourselves. Otherwise, you might think, oh, just no big deal, right? It's important to share in groups. This is one of the groups we have in church. But if we can't share the way God has touched our lives and with people that we know and trust, then how are we ever going to share with others? The next thing that we want to do, I mentioned it already, in worship. This was a Sunday that we had a spontaneous choir. We just got up and sang. It was so much fun, you know? It was really fun. And then finally, to share with the unconnected. I don't want to pick on grocery stores, but it's a nice way to meet people, you know? It is. So right now, as we think about this, I want to show you a little video that comes along with the study that we're going to do. And because I think it's important for you to hear this too, not just the people that are coming to the class afterwards, but he it's like 2 minutes long. But the way he says it just really gets my attention, so I hope it gets your attention as well. When I first went to seminary, as this is popping up here, I pulled up to whatever the number of the house was, Bay State Road, right beside the Charles River in Boston. And the first person to greet me was Doug. I had this blue Toyota pickup with a topper on it, and he helped me unload all my junk into a room that didn't have enough room for all my junk. It made a difference. I said, hey, maybe Boston is not going to be such an unfriendly city after all, you know? It makes a difference, doesn't it? Okay, do you know your own story? Here we go.
In asking the question of people, tell me about your faith story, or tell me about your journey, or tell me about a time recently you've experienced God, most United Methodists that we've interviewed couldn't do it. What they would tell us was their church history, which is fine. I got baptized here, confirmed here, I served on the trustees, finance, I moved churches from here to here, and it was a great church story. It was a church membership story. But that's not what the question was. The question was, tell me about your faith journey. Tell me about a time recently you've experienced God. And even if they could conjure up a story, it was some years old. It is important to be able to articulate that, because as you are working through our sequence of trying to move from getting their name to having a conversation, to having an authentic relationship, to having that moment when somebody asks you, why God, you're able to actually share your story. They don't give a flip about your church history. They want to know if God is real, and does God matter in my life, and does God matter in your life. And you got to be able to share that in the safety of people they already know, whatever team you're on, that before we go home from our team meeting for one full year, we're asking the question of everybody, tell me about a time recently you've experienced God. So we can start practicing our story. We got to rediscover our eyes that what God is doing in people's lives. But we can't hardly tell our story anymore. And we're never going to tell it to a stranger or somebody out in the world if we can't even tell it in the safety of our own folks. Could we start asking this question with every time every group committee meets at the church? Tell me about a time recently you've experienced God in your group. Now, I will just tell you, the first time you do this at your church, it's going to be very revealing and very uncomfortable. Because if you said at the trustee meeting and say, before we go home tonight, we're going to all answer the question, tell me about a time recently you've experienced God, you're going to get some very blank looks and stares back. In fact, you'll get pushback. You'll get people who go, that's not trustee stuff. And we're out of time. It's time to go home. So I got more pushback in my church about this single question than anything I did. I would tell you, after a year or so of practicing that, it began to change our experience of church. It changes everything. Tell me about a time you experienced God recently. You could start right now in your class.
Okay. Well, let's start right now. While we're taking the offering, just turn to somebody beside you and tell about how you've experienced God somehow. And it's going to be uncomfortable. I mean, you may not even have thought of anything yet, but if not, ask them to talk.